From the ancient Assyrians and Urartians, a civilization known as the Mandaeans are also known to have inhabited the area before being absorbed by the Medes. In 1985, a 13-line Aramaic inscription produced by this civilization was discovered on a stele from Tepe Qalaichi near Bukhan in West Azerbaijan province, dating from the 8th century BC. So, a number of important archaeological sites thus attest to the antiquity and scope of human settlement in the region, known as Assyrian settlement. Among them are archaeological mounds of various sizes, found mostly in Assyrian and some Armenian villages, such as Digala, Bezvagi, Jamuslue, Gültepe, Çarbaş, Gülpaşan, Iriava, and the list goes on. I've marked some of them here on the map. Obviously, there's a large concentration in the middle, and I couldn't fit all the names. But if you want a list, I can provide that to you. Now here you can see one of them. I think this is Tulatepe. Yeah. And these are all archaeological mounds. So these all show ancient civilizations that lived in that area before. This is Gültepe. Okay, so these are sometimes explained by locals to be vast piles of ashes from the sacred perpetual fires of the ancient Zoroastrians. A number of these, however, have revealed, in addition to ash deposits, clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform, cylinder seals depicting Mesopotamian deities, and bronze figurines, as well as human and animal bones, tombs, weapons, earrings, bracelets, coins, and earthenware vessels, such as vases, bowls, lamps, plates and pots, and foundations of buildings probably dating to ancient Urartian, Mandaean and Assyrian settlements from the 1st to 3rd millennia BC. Indeed, the mound at Gültepe has been found to have been inhabited as early as the 4th millennium BC. So 6,000 years ago there were people living in Gültepe. In many cases, as you can see here, the mounds are covered by Christian cemeteries. This is the mound in the village of Dizateka, and if you look closely, there are bits of pots and ancient pottery that are coming up from the ancient people that lived there before. Village of Kayajuk and Salamas. So, in many cases, as I said, the mounds are covered by Christian cemeteries. Other important archaeological sites include a relief depicting the first Sasanian emperor, Ardashir I, and his son and successor, Shapur I, from the 3rd century AD, receiving the submission of a local king, carved into the cliffs above Khan Tahti, which is between Urmi and Salamas. Also very ancient is the dam and castle of the village of Jamalava, as well as a number of ruined castles that exist throughout the region. Other local traditions recount that the foundation of Urmi's old city wall, and this is a very old picture of it, which was demolished in the mid-20th century, was originally built by Sasanian Emperor Bahram V in the 5th century AD, also known as Bahram Gur. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about Assyrians of Urmi during the medieval period. The Assyrians of the Urmi region consider themselves to be indigenous, and they trace their conversion to Christianity to the 1st century AD. Urmi is traditionally held to be the legendary Tebarma and fabled birthplace of the ancient Persian sage Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, the founder of Zoroastrianism. Thus, the Assyrians claimed that the 3 magi stopped at Urmia on their return from visiting the Christ child in Bethlehem, founding the old church of the Virgin Mary there, in which one of them is allegedly buried. And this is the old church, Matwarem Atikta, okay, the old church of the Virgin Mary. This is inside before restoration. It's actually been restored, all the plaster's been taken off the walls. And to the right you can see what they are calling the tomb of one of the wise men. Furthermore, according to the Acts of the Apostles, there were Mesopotamian, Persian, Parthian, and Median pilgrims in Jerusalem who were among the very first Christian converts at Pentecost. These are also traditionally credited with having spread the good news in the Persian Empire, though most scholars concede that both of the above traditions belong largely to the realm of myth or faith. The Assyrians further claim that the Apostle Thomas passed through the villages of Balula and Marnucha, literally the Lord's resting, before crossing Lake Urmi on the way to India, and that the Apostle Bartholomew was martyred at Khusrawa. Now, let me see. Here's an old picture of Khusrawa, actually. I'll leave it there. Saint Bartholomew the Apostle is reputed to evangelize the region alongside Mesopotamia, Assyria, Babylonia, and Armenia, where he was also killed by a local king. Maybe I should hold it. So how the slide up? Technical difficulties. Excuse me, everyone. Okay, that's better. So other traditions relate to a tour of the area in 642 AD by a Chinese princess named Bapri, sister of Tang Emperor Taizong in the 600s, who had converted to the Church of the East, and who also funded a restoration of the old Church of Matmarya. Additionally, oral histories give an important role to Persian Emperor Khosrow II, or Khosrow Parviz, after who was named the important Assyrian town of Khusrawa, or Khosrow Abad, the place of Khosrow. So here is an old picture from the 1880s of Khusrawa and of the Church of Margibargis, which I'll be talking about in a sec. According to local tradition, many families in this village are descended from Assyrians of Baz in the Hakkari region, who were commissioned by the emperor to carry the true cross which he had plundered from Jerusalem in 614 AD and brought to the royal palace of Qasr Shirin as a gift to his beloved Christian consort Shirin. It is said that the main church at Khusrawa was built then to house the cross for 3 to 4 months while the emperor had his camp there, and that at night light would be seen emanating from it through the windows of the church. Khosrow is further said to have passed through the districts of Targawar with the true cross, and is credited with having built the ancient stone church at Marselgis around the turn of the 7th century AD. Sites traditionally associated with his legend include the former Assyrian villages of Tulakke and Silvana, the name of which is said to derive from the Aramaic word for cross. So this is the inside of the church of Marselgis, which, according to legend, was built by Khosrow Parviz around the beginning of the 7th century. So, in addition, there are other old churches in the Urmia region which attest to the long-standing presence of the Assyrians there. This is the church of Mardanian in the village of Ada, very old stone church. On the left you have the church of Martkhanna, Saint Anna in Jamlava. On the other side you have the church of Margora in Zayn Aluve, church of Mariukhana, Gabilan, church of Markoriakos in Charbash, Toyotuidaye, church of monastery of St. Peter and Paul, Kilisakande, Virgin Mary's Church in Charbash, the Church of Saint Ade and Mary in Alqaye or Murishkare. And all of these are said to have been built between the 7th and 8th, 9th centuries. They're very, very old. Now, traditionally, Maliks or chiefs, we tend to think Malikke or chiefs, Maliks were only from Hakkari. But actually, a lot of people don't know that the Assyrians of Urmi also had Maliks. They also had chiefs. And they were located in the villages of Guitapa, Digala, Anhar, Spurban, Yargija, Shamshajian, Ardishai, Khusrawa, Mawana, Ambeg, and Gachin, as well as the districts of Margawar and Suldus. There was also a family of Bagzads or noblemen at Patabur in the Salamas district. Now these are mentioned frequently in inscriptions and documents from the 17th, 18th, 19th and early 20th centuries. The earliest mention of a Malik or a Rishana in the Urmi region comes from the inscription of Zangisha, son of Adil Shah of Khusrawa, who died in 1484. So there's a lot of history there. Now, Urmi became an important regional center in the 9th century under the Abbasid Caliphate, and in 1184 was seized by the Seljuk Turks. In terms of documentary evidence, however, the city first appeared in this period as the seat of a bishop belonging to the Church of the East in 1068 and 1111. The earliest surviving Syriac manuscript copied at Urmia dates from 1243, and in 1284, Urmia was visited by the then Catholicos Patriarch Mario Ala III, who was a Mongol. An 11th century Syriac manuscript was also supposed to have been found in a very unlikely place, which is why I have this picture here. It was found in a vault under Urmia's Masjid-e-Jami during the execution of repair work there in the 19th century. However, this does not appear to have survived. This used to be a cathedral dedicated to St. George and was converted to a mosque by one of the rulers of Tabriz in 1271, and is now the oldest and most historic Muslim place of worship in Urmi, and it's located in the center of town. So, between the 13th and 19th centuries, the evidence from both Assyrian inscriptions and manuscripts points to a continuity of habitation, cultural output, and literary activity amongst Urmi's Assyrians throughout the Middle Ages, indicating the vibrancy of their important community, as well as the strong ties between Assyrian communities in the Urmia plain and the mountainous Hakkari highlands, even as far west as the city of Diyarbakir in Turkey, Jerusalem in the Holy Land, and Rome. Additionally, one scholar we know is known to have originated from Iranian Azerbaijan or the Urmia area. His name was Sargis Barwahle, and he was a monk at the monastery of Rabban Hurmuzd in Iraq, and he composed a lot of metrical homilies and a life of the saint around 1500 AD. So, I'm going to talk a little bit now about Urmi in the 19th century. After more than 2 centuries without any contact with the Western world, the Assyrians of Urmi were again rediscovered by an Anglican missionary. If you need to go, that's fine. I have another 10 maybe 15 minutes. You good? Okay, sweet. So, after more than 2 centuries without any contact with the Western world, the Assyrians of Urmi were again rediscovered by an Anglican missionary, the Reverend Joseph Wolfe, in 1825, and American Congregational missionaries Eli Smith and Harrison White in 1830. 5 years later, an American Presbyterian mission was founded at Urmi by Reverend Justin Perkins, who you see there on the right. And this is a picture of the American mission in Urmi. Subsequently, Urmi became a focus of foreign missionary activity aimed largely at Christianizing the local Christian Assyrians and Armenians. Now, some of these missions came with the aim of strengthening or reforming the existing Church of the East in the area, as was the initial hope of the American mission. The French Lazarist or Catholic mission, established in 1842 on the other hand, had the express goal of bringing about the total conversion to Catholicism of the remaining Assyrians from the Church of the East. And yes, this is actually the old Umrat Mat Maryam in Gyonustu in Urmi. So this is a picture from the 1880s. So later on, The Americans themselves, followed by the Russian Orthodox in 1898, began to aim aggressively at completely assimilating ethnic Assyrians to their own denominations of Christianity. In all cases, these missions were initiated in countries which were at the same time major world empires and who wished to assert their growing political influence in the region. On the other hand, while the Church of the East suffered and the unity of the ethnic Assyrians had been heavily compromised, the positive effects of the missions cannot be easily ignored. In many ways, they completely revolutionized the dynamic of the community and mobilized individuals within it to become more receptive to what was occurring in the world around them. At the forefront of this revolution was the adoption of a new literary language based on the spoken Assyrian Aramaic, which was reduced to writing by the American missionaries and their Assyrian helpers, and which in turn became the vehicle through which loads of new information was disseminated amongst the masses. Thus began an era of firsts. Firsts for the Assyrian nation, done by the Assyrians of Urmi. With the first modern Assyrian schools opened in 1836, the first Assyrian girls' schools opened in 1838, the first Neo-Aramaic text in the region in the form of an epitaph from Charbash dated 1839, the first modern Assyrian printing press, which was opened in 1840, the first modern Assyrian printed book in 1841, the first ever newspaper in all of Iran. So the first newspaper that came out in Iran wasn't in Farsi, it wasn't in Persian, it was in Assyrian. And it was Zahrir al-Bar, or Rays of Light, published in modern Assyrian in 1849. The first standard translation of the entire Bible into modern Assyrian in 1852. The establishment of Iran's first modern medical college at Urmia in 1878. By 1877, some 21 million pages of Christian literature, as well as teaching materials and scientific publications, were printed in modern Assyrian and classical Syriac by the American Mission Press alone. So just one press. 21 million pages of knowledge. And this here is a picture of a book of anatomy and physiology from Urmi, published in 1890. So around the turn of the 20th century, the various missions in Urmi ran a total of about 250 primary and high schools, including about 10 schools for girls, not to mention colleges and seminaries. By 1908, roughly 80% of both Assyrian men and women in the Urmi region were literate in at least one language, and about 5 newspapers in modern Assyrian circulated from the city, with as many Assyrian language printing presses. Not only did Assyrian students learn modern Assyrian, but often also classical Syriac, as well as local languages such as Persian, Turkish, and Armenian, international languages such as English, French, Russian, and German, and literary languages such as Arabic, Greek, and Latin. Indeed, the Assyrians of Urmi, formerly considered as an unimportant backwater of the Persian Empire, thus began to embrace worldliness and to assert themselves both culturally and politically. Thus they came to be counted as an asset to the empire and among its most loyal and productive citizens because of their wealth and education. Consequently, the authority of the old religious establishment was gradually diminished, as both laymen and women began to read and write as they pleased, and in a language which they fully understood. Previously, this privilege had been largely the domain of clerics, selected lay leaders and their families. Now, a number of Assyrians gained affluence and respect in official circles, as they too entered into the medical profession, introduced by the missionaries. Assyrian physicians or doctors from Urmia were in high demand all over Iran because of their quality education and renowned skills, with at least one of them during his lifetime bestowed the honorific official title of Luqman al-Atibba, or a sage of all physicians. The 19th century further emerged as a period in which many local Assyrians participated in pilgrimages to Jerusalem and the Holy Land, thereby gaining the honorific title of Muqdusi. A number of inscriptions from Urmi between 1883 and 1908 also record the deaths of Assyrian men in Yerevan, Armenia, Tbilisi, Georgia, Rostov-on-Don in Russia, Kiev, and Mariupol in the Ukraine, and other cities within the then Russian Empire, as they sought to make their fortunes through peddling their various trades there. This indicates the greater mobility of the Assyrians in the Urmi region. No longer were they peasants or serfs tied to the land by feudal lords who dictated their every move. Now the Assyrians of Urmi were literate and were free to travel the world and choose their own destiny. Subsequently, this also marks the establishment of the first Assyrian diaspora communities, yes, even before Australia, with the first Urmi Assyrians settling in the United States in the 1880s and establishing a Presbyterian church in Chicago in 1912. And this church, the Carter Memorial Presbyterian Church, built in 1912 in Chicago, is actually the first purpose-built Assyrian building in the diaspora, outside of the Middle East. And it still stands today. It's not a church though, it's a hair salon. Furthermore, identity, both secular and religious, came to play an increasingly important role in the life of Urmi's ethnic Assyrians, precisely because of the presence of the foreign missions. Previously, they had identified themselves as a Nestorian millat, or church nation. And this is a tombstone from Umar Batmaryam in Urmi from 1864, and it belongs to the brother of the then patriarch Marshamun, and it says that he was the head of the Millat Nustornaya, or Millat Nustorneta. This was because of the all-encompassing dominance of the Church of the East, to which all Aramaic-speaking Christians of the region adhered. Now, with the arrival of the missionaries and the subsequent conversion of thousands of Assyrians to other Christian denominations, the usage of this Ottoman-inspired millet framework was rendered null and void if the Assyrians wished to maintain themselves as one ethnic and national unit. Thus, we witness not only an Assyrian cultural and intellectual renaissance developing within the crucible of the Urmi region, but also the birth of Assyrian nationalism and patriotic sentiments by the end of the 19th century. Significantly, Assyrians were recognized as an indigenous ethno-religious minority in Iran's 1908 constitution and have had the right to their own secular representation in the country's parliament ever since. Moreover, Iran remains the only country in the Middle East to recognize Assyrians as an ethnicity and not as a religious collection of disparate churches. Now, if anybody has heard of the story of the 120 Assyrian men that went in the boat to Sharaf Khana in 1918 to get weapons for the Assyrians that were fighting against the Turks in Urmi, and this is actually their gravestone in Tabriz. And the inscription is from 1920, and it's interesting because it's very nationalistic. And it uses the words Aturai. It doesn't use the words Suriyai or Suirai. So, you know, for the full of love for the nation, true sons of holy Assyria, for the good of the nation, and the youths of Assyria in Chicago. So this shows the birth of the nationalist sentiment in Urmi. So talking about World War I, I'm going to talk a little bit about the 20th century now. Now, in the early 20th century, the Urmi region witnessed major disruptions, including a brief occupation by Ottoman forces between 1908 and 1911. This was then followed by a Russian military occupation that began in 1910. At that time, the Christian Assyrian population of Urmi, the whole area, numbered over 80,000 people, about 11,000 households, in addition to some 4,000 Aramaic-speaking Jews. Together, constituting the largest ethno-linguistic group in the region, and they were more than 34% of the population. In August 1914, the Ottoman military, joined by mercenaries from amongst the Kurds, began to commit atrocities amongst the Assyrian communities of the mountainous frontier districts. As a result, those who could do so fled for their lives to the relative security of the Urmia plain. By December, the Ottoman military, joined again by Kurdish mercenaries, invaded and occupied the Urmia and Salamas plains for many months, embarking on a well-documented campaign of genocidal massacres. Many Assyrians from the Salamas and Anzal districts fled to the Russian border to escape the threat. During this time, a large number of Assyrians and Armenians in the region suffered from atrocities and massacres, most notably at Ada and Sapurhan, and at Abdi Shay, where a number of young girls drowned themselves in Lake Urmi to avoid being raped. At Gulpashan, where 75 men were exterminated in the Christian cemetery, and at the town of Haftavan in Salamas, which the Ottoman troops used as a military base, and where some 800 corpses were found disposed of in wells. Throughout the summer of 1915, after the Russians returned, Salamas became the destination of tens of thousands of Assyrian refugees that had survived massacres committed by the Ottoman forces in the Hakkari highlands, among them my grandfather and his family. Many of them were settled in the district's villages, and a number were also settled in other areas, especially the Urmia plain. The patriarch, Marshamun Binyamin, chose to reside at Khusrawa with his family during this period, and he was murdered at nearby Koynashar in March 1918. Now those Assyrians of the region who had managed to survive massacre, hunger, disease, and the general fear and panic that plagued the First World War, abandoned their homes on the 31st of July 1918, fleeing to Hamadan and then to Iraq amongst a convoy of 90,000 Assyrian and Armenian refugees. Out of the 17,000 people that stayed, or that couldn't leave, only 600 managed to survive the massacres in Urmi. And many of the survivors, chose to return to their homes after the war ended. In June 1919, Reverend Muller of the American Presbyterian Mission counted 184 Assyrian and Armenian Christians in the entire district of Salamas, only 3 of whom were adult men. So all the men had been killed. In total, an estimated 40,000 Assyrians lost their lives between 1914 and 1919 from Urmi. Now, after 1920, Assyrian refugees started leaving the refugee camps in Iraq and returning to Iran. In 1922, the Iranian government allowed the first Assyrian returnees to make their way back to their homes and their villages. Assyrians thus began to return to the region from the Baquba refugee camp, and a number of them resettled in their native villages and reclaimed their lands. These, however, amounted to nothing more than a mere fraction of their former strength. Unfortunately, in many districts, Kurds or Azeris had now become the dominant ethnic group, and the Christians, now a tiny minority, found living amongst them unbearable in many cases. And these are just some pictures of the Assyrians in various parts of Urmi during the 1930s and 1940s. Between 1929 and 1931, the Salamas district was shaken by a series of earthquakes, with the most devastating and deadly one occurring on the 6th of May 1930. The local Christian communities would never recover from that critical time. Many people were killed or injured, and the vast majority of the district's churches and historical monuments were left in heaps of jumbled ruins. Then, in December 1946, the historic Assyrian communities in the Urmi plain were again dealt a fatal blow with the massacre of scores of youths and intellectuals associated with the failed Soviet-backed Azerbaijan People's Republic, what the Assyrians later referred to as the Democrat War, or Plašak Demokrat. During this time, the Iranian military looted some of the wealthiest Assyrian villages and conducted revenge killings on those who cooperated with the failed republic. Prior to that year, there had been a notable increase in the populations of Assyrian villages since their resettlement by returnees. After 1947, however, these villages began to decline as their inhabitants migrated to the relative safety and better living standards of larger cities such as Hamadan, Kermanshah, Qazvin, and above all the capital Tehran. Additionally, the last Assyrians left the district of Targawa in the 1950s after local Kurds attempted to force Assyrian girls into marriage with their sons. Indeed, the 1950s and 60s emerged as a turning point which sealed the fate of Assyrian village life in the Urmi district forever. Since then, the Assyrian population of the district has often fluctuated, as many of them left their villages in the surrounding countryside to settle in the city and its urban sprawl. Migration to the other urban centers in Iran and overseas has also managed to keep their population low. This has accelerated especially since the Islamic Revolution in 1979 and the Iran-Iraq War in 1979 to 1988. In 1980, the Assyrians in Iran numbered about 40,000, comprising 15% of the country's Christian population. Of these, nearly half were estimated to be living in the Urmi region, so about 20,000. Today, however, there are less than 15,000 Assyrians left in the whole of Iran, not even half of whom remain in Urmi. So here you can see some of the churches that have been abandoned, some are falling into ruins. Here you can see some of the cemeteries. So okay, I'll name them for you. On the left is Umrat Malakhay Juriyad and Ardishai. On the right is Umrat Matmaryam, Mawana. This is the cemetery of Alwach, which is in very, very bad condition, almost destroyed. And here you can see some other Assyrian inscriptions and gravestones that have been destroyed. Now, some 6,000 Assyrians continue to reside there, being for the most part concentrated in the provincial capital of Urmi. The majority of these belong to the Church of the East, as well as the Chaldean Catholic, Evangelical, Presbyterian and Pentecostal churches. Roughly 1,500 Assyrians, so about 380 houses, still reside in 36 of the remaining Christian villages. Most of those who remain in these villages, however, are elderly, and there are very few families, with the exception of settlements such as Sangar, Burzukhan and Iryava, which have been now swallowed up by Urmia's urban sprawl. So, I just want to close by showing you some photographs that I took on my trips in 2008 and 2009.